Rights in New Jersey. My name is Scott Richman, and I'm the New York, New Jersey director for ADL. Put simply, democracy depends on ensuring that every voter has an equal and fair opportunity to cast a ballot. There is perhaps no more fundamental right in a democracy than the right to vote for the candidate of your choice. This has always been true, and in the time of COVID-19, when in order to vote, you quite literally may need to put your health in jeopardy, the job of all of us is to ensure access to the ballot box, and this could not be more critical. Since 1913, ADL has made a commitment to securing justice and fair treatment for all, which includes freeing our election process from restrictions that have a discriminatory impact. ADL began speaking out about this in 1965, when ADL opposed the disenfranchisement of Black people, and we have been speaking out ever since. I'm sure that I do not have to explain to this group that this November's elections are particularly vulnerable. The pandemic underscores and amplifies long existing inequities disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities. Extremists online and off seek to manipulate and exploit fear and danger, and conspiracy theories about voter fraud have been surging. This is all exacerbated by the particularly polarized time in which we live, and I'm sure we'll hear much more about that on today's panel. I want to thank my incredible staff who put this program together, regional operations team of Alex Rosenberg, Rachel Greenspan, and Oriana Capone, and the development team of Aaron Kuchar, Jennifer Wang, and others. Thank you also to my colleague, Karen Levit, for moderating today. She did a superb job yesterday moderating a similar panel for New York voters. Before we get to the discussion, please note that ADL is a 501c3 and is therefore a completely nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose any candidate for office. Our role is to condemn hate and to call for fair treatment no matter which side of the aisle the candidate sits. ADL is not alone in this battle. We actively engaged with appropriate partner organizations on ways to ensure equal and fair access to the ballot, which brings us to today's webinar. Which involves some of these organizations. I'm really excited to hear from them and know that we'll all learn a great deal, but perhaps equally as important, we will share that with others. You will all be ambassadors, and we hope that you will take the message forward. We'll be sharing links as we go along, which you can also share. There'll be time at the end for questions and answers. Please put your questions in the chat box as we go along, and we'll do our best to get to them. With that, I'm going to turn the floor to Rabbi Victor Appell of Temple Emmanuel of Westfield, New Jersey. They are part of ADL's Signature Synagogue program. The Signature Synagogue program involves dozens of synagogues in New York and New Jersey who have banded together to fight anti-Semitism and hate in their communities and ignite a congregation-wide commitment to raising awareness and speaking out, and we are grateful to them. Today's program is being carried out under the auspices of this important program and in partnership with Temple Emmanuel. If anybody wishes to learn more about the Signature Synagogue program in hopes that you'll bring it to your own community, or in general about ADL and you want to get involved, just visit our website, nynj.adl.org, nynj.adl.org. You can also connect with us via Facebook or Twitter. Rabbi Appell, thank you and your community so much for sponsoring this event, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Scott. We are so happy to partner with the ADL on such an important learning opportunity. At Temple Emmanuel, our Voting Matters group has been active for years in getting out the vote. Drawing on Jewish texts for inspiration from Prophet Jeremiah, who instructed us to engage in our communities, to Hillel, who taught that we should not separate ourselves from our community. Our Voting Matters Committee has worked diligently to encourage both our Temple family and our larger community to exercise the sacred right of voting. The committee has reached out to Temple members, highlighted personal stories of the importance of voting, led registration drives on local college campuses, and in this unusual election cycle, made sure that our community understands the intricacies of voting by mail. Educating ourselves about voting rights and access is an important part of our work, And during this week of Sukkot, we are reminded of the fragile nature of many of the things we take for granted. How fitting that this week we take this time to remind ourselves that for some, the right to vote is a fragile one. I know we are looking forward to learning a lot today, and it is my pleasure to turn it over to Karen Levit, our moderator for today's program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, and thank you, Scott. I'm so excited to be having this conversation. This issue is timely and important, and I'm also really excited about the panelists that we've got lined up today. We have Jessie Burns, the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters for New Jersey. I almost said New York, sorry folks. We've got Aaron Greene from the I have NJISJ, so correct me if I'm wrong. That's the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. He's the Associate Counsel from there. Aaron, did I get that right? That's great, thank you. And Brett Pugach, who is a voting rights attorney, who's actually a congregate at Rabbi Appell's synagogue. So let's jump right in. Aaron, could you please give us some historical and legal context for understanding the voting rights issues that we're facing?
Yes, thank you all so much for the opportunity. Thank you also to fellow esteemed panelists for being here today. It's a very important discussion. So just to give some context to voting rights in America, I'll be brief, but I want to just start from a perspective. I'm from South Carolina, and I think it's important to start there. During the Reconstruction era, the Civil Rights Act, 1866. Then you also have the passage of the 15th Amendment that gives the right to vote to Black men. And during that time, the Reconstruction era, actually saw significant changes, specifically in South Carolina. The General Assembly was 70% Black and passed some comprehensive policies like the first public education system. And then we fast forward during that time, by 1940, about 3% of African Americans in the South were not allowed the right to vote. But before that time, 1920, 100 years since the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving the right to women to vote. And you go further, 4 years later, the passage of the Snyder Act, which recognized indigenous people as citizens. And it took until 1962 until all indigenous people, Native Americans, had the right to vote in our country. And today marks the birthday of Fannie Lou Hamer, who played a critical role in the civil rights movement, which led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which protected the right to vote for many people. And it led to hundreds of thousands and millions of people being able to be involved politically, running for office, having many changes made in their community. And during that time, we saw major changes to how Congress looked and on the federal level, state level, local level. But then in 2006, the Voting Rights Act was restored. It was supposed to be in place until 2031. But there was a famous case that I'm sure many people are aware of, Shelby v. Holder in 2013, Supreme Court case, which struck down many key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. And what we saw literally in a matter of hours after that ruling by the Supreme Court, there were so many laws put in place, voting ID laws, polling places closed. I believe over 1,000 polling places have closed, specifically in the South. And but now there is a continued push to restore that key provisions to the Voting Rights Act. And to tie this into New Jersey, 1844, New Jersey restricted people with criminal convictions from voting. And on March 17th, 2020 of this year, the 1844 No More campaign, which we've led with our partners across the state, Governor Murphy signed a law which restored the right to vote to 83,000 people on probation and parole. So a huge, in this moment of 2020, a huge, significant moment in voting rights history. And that is, you know, the hope and joy that we see. But in the same sense, it signifies also the how far we have to go as well of restoring the right to vote to people across this country. We're pushing for full restoration. We have 19,000 people that are incarcerated, 62% are African American, and only 2 states in the United States can you vote if you're incarcerated. So there are millions of people that are barred from voting because of incarceration, but also, even though New Jersey, we were able to get parole probation, that's not universal across the country. There are some states that still limit people from voting. So we still, as we look at how far we've come, we understand that we have a ways to go as well. Thank you.
So since you mentioned voting rights for folks who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, what barriers are there to voting for people who are formerly incarcerated? Yeah, so we at the Institute, my colleague Ron Pierce, who played a pivotal key role in pushing forth the legislation, he voted for the first time in 30 years. And he also helped form a race council, Reform Alliance for Civic Engagement, includes people that are on probation, are on parole, are formerly incarcerated. And one of the key things is that when you have a new law, you have to be intentional about voter education. So that's what we've been doing, because there's a lot of misinformation. You know, some people think that they have to pay some restitution. Some people think that they're carve-outs, but in New Jersey, there are no carve-outs. There's no restitution has to be paid. Once the law was signed, if you're on parole probation, you can register and vote. But what we see across the country, right? We look at Florida, for example. People have to pay restitution before, if they owe money to have the right to vote. So I think with those examples, sometimes when you see that happening in Florida, some people in New Jersey may think, oh, that's the reason I can't vote. So I think it's what we've seen, and what we're intentional about is reaching people that are impacted and letting them know that they have the right to vote. Because you're thinking about people that haven't had the right to vote for, you know, if they've been on parole probation for years, right? They never thought they would have the opportunity to vote again. So, you know, when this law passes, even though, you know, I'm aware and others are aware in this space, it's important that we have a grassroots strategy. And that's something that we've been engaged with, going into communities across this state, and having programs and creating partnerships with grassroots communities that are connected to those that are impacted, to ensure that they register and they vote. Thank you, Aaron. And another thing that you mentioned was the Shelby ruling, and the ways in which that really changed how people vote, how they can vote, their access to voting. So for all of the panelists, what concerns do you have based on what you're seeing on the ground this year? Jesse?
Sure. So I think that the biggest obstacle that we're running into right now has to do with misinformation and disinformation campaigns and trying to combat that. So there's a lot of intentional and not intentional information out there trying to kind of sow discord and make folks feel uncertain about their voting rights and how to cast a ballot. And unfortunately, it's been a huge kind of battle, which, you know, I'm so thankful to be able to be here today to just kind of give factual information about how folks could participate in a nonpartisan way, because we are encountering kind of a lot of fear, a lot of incorrect information about vote by mail, a lot of incorrect information about voting options that we're working against.
What about you, Brett?
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of reiterating a little bit of what Jesse was saying, but I do think that, you know, a lot of the things that I'm concerned about deal more with voter information and misinformation and voter logistics than it does with a particular concern about fraud or wrongdoing or something of that nature. In terms of voting logistics, you know, anything from, you know, do people realize that they don't have to vote only for, you know, candidates of one party? You can vote for, you know, a Republican for president and senator. You can vote a Democrat, and someone else, different position, could be third party. You know, are people aware of that? Are voters going to wait until the last minute? Are they going to go to the wrong polling location because it may have changed now that the polling locations have been consolidated? Are they going to know all the different options? And I think we may be speaking about what those options are a little bit later, but are they going to know all the different options that they have to vote? If their signature gets rejected on a vote by mail ballot, are they going to be following up to make sure that they cure it? When voters are filling out their vote by mail ballot, are they going to be doing it correctly? So it's a lot of those logistical concerns. And I think, one of the things that we kind of have to get in the habit of getting used to as Americans, and particularly here, in New Jersey, we're kind of used to getting our election results on the day of the election. And that's just something that is not going to be happening this election. In fact, we know that as long as your vote by mail ballot is postmarked by election day, it may not be received until after, maybe even up to 7 days after the election. So sometimes that can lead to a little bit of unrest about the results. But I think it's just something that we have to anticipate. One other item I would mention also, although I'm not going to go into great detail about it, just in terms of things that we've heard on the ground, there's been some concern that this is the first year we're doing early counting, where starting 10 days before Election Day, the Board of Elections is going to be opening envelopes and starting to count ballots. So there's been a few groups, organizations that have been concerned about, I guess what you could call a premature leak of the vote counts, where certain officials might kind of know beforehand and might be able to tip off, whether it's party members or certain campaigns, that might lead to an unfair advantage. Those are some of the different kinds of concerns that we're hearing. There are certain mechanisms that have been put in place to try to prevent against that, but just thought it was worth mentioning.
Aaron, was there anything you wanted to add? The question was, what concerns do you have based on what you're seeing on the ground this year?
Yes, just to be brief, I think most everything's been touched on. I just want to provide a little bit of some of our research that we did with our assessment. We partnered with the League of Women Voters, with Jesse and NAACP. And one thing that we saw from the primary election was just sometimes some confusion with the vote by mail ballot and just voter education generally. And one of the things that we've been intentional about is really framing our voter education work to answer those needs. So we're calling this election specifically a paper ballot election. Specifically because that, with the vote by mail, but also with voting in person. I know we're going to talk about that, the processes, but, some people were shocked with voting by provisional ballot because they were not aware. So I think one of the things that we've been intentional about is letting people know what to expect before, election day with the different ways they can vote. So they're not shocked. And also people can put plans in place, because we're really encouraging people to make a plan of how you're going to vote so that, when that time comes, there won't be, much of an error made, or people won't be confused, or even when it comes to polling places. I know that we saw that during the primary. Some people were confused by that because we don't have every polling place open, right, due to COVID restrictions. So we're encouraging people to find your polling place before, election day, if you're going to vote, if you're deciding to vote in person. Just things like that, which I think is key in this moment, because we've had a drastic change to how the election is going, what we probably thought a year ago, right? COVID has changed so much, and it's important that we get this information out. And that's why this program today is very, very important, because we're doing that. We're engaging with voters before election day.
So Jesse, we've already discussed a bit of this, but just to highlight it, what's being done to address all of the concerns we just talked about at an institutional level, and also what can the average voter do?
Yeah, so the voting rights folks have been working very much in partnership, as Aaron mentioned, across the state. And I know that this is happening in states around the country, where we're being sure to be proactive about voter education that's needed. So things like this event today are really important to make sure that voters understand all of their options. Some things that the individual voter can do. The League of Women Voters has put up a nonpartisan voter engagement toolkit. We actually just put that up, I think, yesterday. because this question keeps coming up about how can I help? How can I help spread accurate information? How can I help get the word out? So we put up this toolkit on our site. We're still building it out, but it has things like email templates you can send your friends, ways you can text folks. It has links to accurate information from our partners and from us. It has all the stuff that you need if you're in New Jersey, from the New Jersey Division of Elections, to get information right from the source. It also has guides to understanding misinformation and disinformation so that folks prevent sharing that on social media, and tools like this. So there definitely was a need that we kept hearing from voters. And again, we partnered with the Institute on this assessment. So we've been watching very carefully with the Institute for Social Justice on what kind of problems or what kind of questions or what kind of whatever is coming up directly from voters on the ground, and responding very quickly right to that.
Great, thank you. For all of our panelists, do you see voter suppression tactics having a disproportionate impact on marginalized communities? Jesse.
I was gonna let Aaron go first, since that's their, the Institute is really leading that work in a lot of ways. So Aaron already mentioned people on parole and probation. And we do work with the Institute and with the New Jersey Reentry Corporation to reach that particular population, to get them information they need. As far as voter intimidation, I'm going to let Aaron speak to this, but it's always communities that have Black and brown populations that we see the most problems happening in. New Jersey in general, I've been doing this about 13 years, has been pretty good about things like making sure that polling locations are accessible to everybody. I don't know what we're going to see with the consolidation. We'll watch that to make sure that consolidations of polling locations aren't hurting specifically, historically marginalized and disenfranchised communities. But in general, New Jersey has been pretty good about making sure that polling locations are accessible, and that we have a 100-foot buffer zone around our polling locations, which give a little bit of a safe area to prevent against voter intimidation. So that's something that New Jersey has instituted. We work with the election protection folks to make sure that if there's anything happening on the ground, that it's immediately reported. And I found that our election officials at the county and state level have been very receptive to reacting very quickly on election day if something comes up. I don't know if Aaron, you wanted to add.
Yes, so just to add to that, one thing that we worked on specifically with the primary in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we were very intentional making sure that specifically the African American community, voters, other marginalized communities felt comfortable. I know that we initially we had ballot drop box locations at police stations. So we wrote letters with our partners to address that, specifically because everybody may not feel comfortable, right, with the ballot drop box being there. And currently we have some legislation now that we're pushing for to at least have 100 feet buffer with the ballot drop box locations with law enforcement agencies and things of that sort, specifically because we want to make sure, like I said, every voter feels comfortable. And through that, I remember when we were calling certain counties, some of them expressed, they didn't think about that, and they made that change specifically. We want to make sure that every county does that because we want to make sure that all voters, before election day or on election day, that they have the requisite things in place that will give them the confidence they need to cast their ballot.
And so just to add from a general perspective, kind of touching on what Jesse said, I think the research generally will show that, whether it's low-income voters or younger voters or voters who lack mobility, and especially communities of color are the hardest hit populations when it comes to any voter suppression tactics. I would add that a couple of things that are in place that can be helpful is that this is an all vote by mail election. And there are multiple different ways that voters can vote, which could help alleviate certain concerns, particularly with respect to voter intimidation and things of that nature. And the other thing too is that we have online voter registration for the first time this year. That's a new feature. And I think anytime you have the ability to do something like that from the comfort of your home and not have to go out, you're going to see less people disenfranchised in that manner.
So voter intimidation just got mentioned a few times. And what are people's options if they show up to their polling site and they don't, for whatever reason, don't feel safe at their polling site? What should they do?
Well, if they have any issues, we are a part of a cohort of the Lawyers Committee. It's an important number I want everyone to take down, 1866-R-VOTE, and I'll put that in the chat, 1866-R-VOTE. If anyone has any issues on election day, it's important that they call that number to notify the hotline. We have people that be on there all day, and they will report it to the necessary people within our state to notify them of what's going on. We have lawyers that are going to be on that hotline. We have legal professionals, volunteers from across the state. We have an amazing cohort of organizations that will be engaged to make sure that voters are not only protected, but we want to make sure that when we hear concerns of voters not being able to, not feeling comfortable about casting their ballot, or facing any barrier, we have an infrastructure in place to respond to that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know, I really hope folks don't need it, but have your plan A, your voting plan about how you're going to cast that ballot, and maybe just make a plan B. So know your options. So, my voting plan, which I did, is I received my vote by mail ballot this weekend. I filled it out as a family. We went to our ballot drop box that was closest to us yesterday, and we cast our ballot that way. Now, if I encountered something at that ballot drop box, I might have a different plan, right? Like, where are the other drop boxes in my county located? Where's the county board of elections? So you can cast the ballot in a lot of ways. Specifically, Karen, to your point on election day, if you go to your polling place and you don't feel comfortable for some reason, one, definitely report it. Folks need to know. So definitely do what Aaron is talking about. But two, make sure that you vote. So you can go find a ballot drop box that's located nearby and put your VBM, go get your vote by mail ballot and use it that way. You can go to your county clerk if you don't have your vote by mail ballot and get a replacement ballot and then cast it there. Or you to your polling location at a different time, but make sure that you have, all of your options. And, the casting your ballot is the most important action that you can take. And really, I really hope that nobody encounters any barriers to doing their plan A, but don't let that stop you from voting. There's always help, and there's always another way to cast your ballot.
Great, thank you. So Brett, what are the different options for voting in New Jersey this year?
So there are 5 different options. I should start by saying that it's an all vote by mail election, and what that means is that all registered voters will get a VBM ballot, a vote by mail ballot, regardless of their party affiliation. And then the 5 ways to vote kind of, well, what happens once you receive it? What are the different things that you can do? So the first option is to mail your vote by mail ballot via the United States Postal Service. So it's basically just filling it out and sending it out in the mail. With that option, I think we mentioned before, it has to be postmarked by Election Day, which is November 3rd. And if it is postmarked by then, it can be received up to a week later on November 10th. If there's no postmark, then it can be received by November 5th. The second option is to use one of these secure drop boxes. So the counties are mandated to have a certain number of drop boxes in each county. I know some of the counties are even doing one in each municipality in the county. So you should look up, I'm sure you can find them online, or contact elections officials to find out, or the county clerk to find out where those drop boxes are. And those are secure drop boxes that will be checked, starting 45 days out from the election. It will be checked on a daily basis by board staff and taken to the Board of Elections to be counted. You can use that option, up through Election Day on November 3rd. The third option is to bring your vote by mail ballot directly to the Board of Elections, up through Election Day on November 3rd. Usually when you do that, one thing to keep in mind is you might have to sign in, and there might be some kind of ID or something that they'll ask you to show when you're there. So make sure to bring that with you. A fourth option is you can bring your vote by mail ballot directly with you to your polling place on Election Day on November 3rd. That's an option that in the past we have not had that ability to do it. Usually in a regular election, you can't bring your vote by mail ballot and just hand it in at the poll. But in light of COVID and all the new changes this year, you can do that this year. And the final option is to vote in person at your polling place, which for overwhelming majority of people will mean that it will be a provisional ballot. It's not necessarily, you're not voting on the machine. The exception for that is if you are a disabled voter and you fill out a certification saying that you're unable to vote on a paper ballot. But so that final option is voting in person on a paper provisional ballot, and you do that while polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. on Election Day, November 3rd.
Great, thank you. And Aaron, in addition to what we've already discussed, are there any other major recent changes in New Jersey voting?
Yes, so one thing I want to lift up is the Ballot Cure Act. We were involved with litigation initially a few months ago to get a cure put in place for the primary, and now we have actually legislation now in place. And I'll go through briefly what that is signature matching. So in your vote by mail ballot, you give your signature, and historically there's been shown evidence of a number of those ballots being thrown out because signature matching, and it disproportionately impacts communities of color. So the Ballot Cure Act provides a remedy for that, right? If you have a signature mismatch issue, you will be notified by letter. So it's important that people would track their ballots, and you can do that. And I'll go through that as well after I'm finished. But you track your ballot, so you'll be notified via mail with a cure letter, which will give you the opportunity to rectify your signature, and you'll put in information on the form. So for instance, your driver's license number, the last four digits of your social security number are a statewide accepted ID. And that will be the new signature and everything. The verification will need to be put in place by 48 hours before the November 20th election certification date. And what we saw with that during the primary is that thousands of ballots were counted due to having this ballot cure procedure being put in place. So it had an amazing impact on the July primary, and I'm sure it's going to have a significant impact in the general election, because it's one of those things, right, where you never know why someone's signature could not match. Maybe they just I know my signature doesn't match all the time. So there are things that we have to put these measures in place, and I'm so glad that with the Institute and work with Jesse and NAACP to get this first of all to file the lawsuit, and then from there getting that in place for the July primary, but then fortunate enough to have this become law now. So we have this measure in place because with vote by mail, as we saw during the primary, a lot of people utilized it. We had the second highest turnout in primary history in New Jersey. And we're going to see, I know we're going to have a great turnout again with vote by mail. So what can we do to make sure that, these ballots are cast? And I think the signature match issue is one of those things. I'm so glad that New Jersey has adopted a ballot cure procedure. It's going to have a great impact, I know, for the general election.
Thank you, Aaron. Jesse, this is probably related. How do voters make sure that their vote by mail ballots are counted, and what should they do if their ballots are rejected?
Yeah, so Aaron mentioned the Track My Ballot tool. On the New Jersey Division of Elections, you can sign up to track your ballot. You'll be able to see when your county election official sent it to you, and then you'll be able to see when it was, after you send it back, when it was received. So this provides some, reassurance to voters to know that their ballot has made it to where it needs to be. That status will be changed to accepted or rejected, but that tends not to happen until after the election day. So you really do need to watch to see if you receive a cure notification, either through the mail, or they might try to contact you in a different way, like email, if they have that information for you. But look to see if you get a cure notification prior to election day, so you can react to that as quickly as possible. I think the best thing folks can do is prevent the mistakes before they happen. So we have this ballot cure piece in place, which is really important for signature mismatch, because that's harder to prevent. But the other reasons folks see their ballot rejected, I think the top reasons we saw in the primary were the ballot was received too late. So the remedy there is cast your vote early. Make sure that if you send it on November 3rd, that you watch it get postmarked. Use the means that get right to an election official. So use a ballot drop box if you're right up against the date, because election officials pick those up directly. Use the Board of Elections office. Use other things other than the U.S. Postal Service. The Postal Service is still a great option, but do it early. The other piece was that the certificate was missing. So on your VBM, your vote by mail ballot, there's a flap and that you have to sign, right? And it has like an edge there. Do not tear it off. It says do not detach, don't tear it off. Sometimes voters think that they have to tear that off. That's meant to keep the secrecy of your ballot. So on that inner envelope, voters sign this, and that's what they use for the signature verification process. After your signature is verified, the election officials rip that off and they put the ballot aside. So now that ballot is completely secret. It doesn't have any identifying information with it, but that is for the election officials to do, not for the voter. So do not detach the certificate. The signature mismatch is another common reason, which Aaron already spoke to. And then the fourth thing sounds kind of silly, but I actually almost did this myself during the primary. People forget to enclose their ballot. So you receive this envelope from your county election officials. Most people have probably already received this, or they are going to receive it this week. And it has all these different pieces. And you're going through very carefully. You fill out the ballot, you fill out the certificate, you have to put the ballot into the inner envelope, fill out the certificate and seal it. Then you put it into the return envelope, you seal that. Just make sure that you follow all the pieces. And I really did. I was very focused on making sure the certificate was filled out correctly, and I followed all the directions. I almost forgot to enclose my own ballot. So I can see how easy that can be. But again, take your time, follow the directions, take time and space with your ballot. It's an important act. Don't rush through it, and you could avoid all these kind of common mistakes.
Is there anything other than a signature mismatch that can be corrected after the fact?
There's a couple of things in the Ballot Cure Act that they used to disqualify ballots, like glue defects, and if the ballot is kind of like messed up for any reason that's not the voters, like the envelope got like ripped in the mail or something that wasn't the voter's fault. Those used to disqualify ballots, but they no longer do. The certificate missing, I don't think there's anything, and Brett or Aaron can correct me if I'm wrong, anything that you can do about that. If you rip off that certificate, I don't think that there's any way to cure that. Your ballot missing, I don't think there's anything you can do about that either. Brett or Aaron, do you think there is?
So, I mean, I think there are other situations that can be cured, even probably outside of maybe even outside of that act, but sometimes there's like an ID issue that can be cured. The other thing I would just add to what Jesse was saying is, if there's an issue, like let's say you already sent your ballot in and you already detached your certificate, I mean, I would call the Board of Elections and see what options they may have. It's possible they may tell you to go and do a provisional ballot, and you'd have to go in person, but even if your vote by mail ballot won't count, then maybe your provisional, your provisional will. So I would definitely, not give up if you find yourself in that kind of unfortunate category, and reach out to the Board of Elections to see if there's anything you can do about it.
Great, thank you. So I am mindful of the time, but I want to dig into the relative merits of the different types of voting that are available, and we do have some questions about that as well in the Q&A, so we can kill two birds with one stone. Brett, can you talk to us a little bit about the pros and cons of mailing in your ballot this year?
Sure. So in terms of the pros of mailing in your mail-in ballot, I think the first and foremost one is safety. And that was kind of, one of the big reasons behind having a vote by mail election in the first place. So it's great for those who have concerns about COVID, especially those who are around or they themselves may be immunocompromised. There's no contact, you're not exposing yourself or others or poll workers who often tend to be of an elderly population and could be at risk. You don't have to leave your house. So definitely safety is one of the pros. Also scheduling, you don't have to go to the polls or to a drop box. It's not going to interfere with your work or other obligations. It's also a great option for those who either can't or don't want to travel. I should note that the postage is already prepaid, the return postage, so you don't have to worry about stamps and how many stamps and all of that. The other good thing about having a vote by mail ballot is that you can kind of study in advance and take your time before you vote, and look into the candidates, as opposed to if you're kind of just showing up in person and for the first time seeing who the candidates are and making an on-the-spot decision. In terms of the cons, I know we have a little bit of a timing issue, so I won't get into everything, but I think the biggest issue is just the potential confusion of the process for those who are unfamiliar with a vote by mail ballot. And I know Jesse kind of talked about the process of, you fill in, you use a black or blue pen and you fill in the oval next to the candidate, you flip your ballot around, see if there's, either public questions or if there's additional races that are on the back. Always make sure you do that. You put it in the inner envelope, you sign the certificate, on the flap, and then you put it in the outer envelope. So there's just kind of a lot of different areas to go wrong if you're not paying attention. And there are instructions when you get your ballot, so I encourage voters to look at that. Other cons include, there's a lot of concern that people have about the mail. Can things get lost in the mail? Is there any wrongdoing that's going on with the mail service? Those are things that some people are concerned about. Issues with timing, is the ballot going to get there in time? Fortunately, we have the new postmark law, where as long as it's postmarked on election day, it has kind of a week after that to get there. And then the last thing we spoke about also was the issue with the signatures, where if it doesn't match, you have to wait to get notified and then take the additional steps to make sure that it gets cured.
Great, thank you. Aaron, what about getting a mail-in ballot, but then taking it to a drop box or the Board of Elections before Election Day?
Yes, so the drop box and Board of Elections are great options. In the primary, we had about 5 per county, and we were able to advocate and push. Now we have a number of locations across each county. And I want to point this is that you can use any drop box in your county. It doesn't have to be the one that's closest to you. And the great thing about the drop box and the Board of Elections is that when you drop it off, it's pretty much, you know, guaranteed to go to the Board of Elections, because these are two functions run by them. So you're not running into some concerns with postmarking or wondering how the mail is going to run. Pretty much guaranteed, and they're all around the counties now. They're in many convenient locations. I know that sometimes people have questions about safety. Many of the drop boxes are municipal buildings. They're at libraries, right? These are public locations that have shown themselves to be very reliable in the primary. So I would, everybody has so many options to choose, but I think that the drop box is a great option. I think the cons, I struggle with this because I was like, are there many cons? But I think some of the cons would be for voters who, you know, that may lack transportation or disabilities, or, you know, so they may not be able to actually go to a drop box location or go to a Board of Elections. But there's one thing to keep in mind that I wanted to lift up, is that a bearer option, a person can be a bearer no more than 3 ballots. But what's important with the bearer option, if you have to sign, you have to notify that. But with that, you can only be a bearer and drop off the ballots at drop box locations, the Board of Elections, and also the USPS boxes. You cannot be a bearer on Election Day. What that means is you cannot take your vote by mail. You cannot take someone else's vote by mail ballot to the polling location on Election Day. You can only take your vote by mail ballot on Election Day. So that's a major change. I want to make sure we lift that up because I know that that's a major change, right? For the other options, you can be a bearer, right? You can carry 3 ballots once it's notified for the drop box, for the USPS, for the Board of Elections, right? But when it comes to, if you want to take your vote by mail ballot at the polling place on Election Day, only you can drop off your polling, ballot on Election Day at your polling place.
And just to be clear, a bearer is somebody who takes somebody else's vote by mail ballot to a drop box or to drop it off at USPS. Yes. Okay, great.
Yes, and I just add real quick that the bearer usually has to fill something out on the envelope with the ballot to make sure, you know, it's clear that they're doing that.
Thank you.
That they have permission to do it.
Does it have to be notarized as well?
It does not have to be notarized.
Thank you. Jesse, what are the pros and cons of taking your mail-in ballot to your poll site on Election Day?
Yeah, so we did advocate to have this available for this election for folks to be able to drop their ballots off at their polling locations. One of the benefits is that it's, you know, while there's many ballot drop boxes in counties, the executive order mandates 10, and a lot of counties did more than that. So I've heard some counties have like 18. There's not necessarily a ballot drop box located, you know, in your town or someplace that might be as close. And as Aaron mentioned, not all the ballot drop boxes are as accessible for folks with disabilities as a polling location might be. So a polling location has to be. So that's a way that we can ensure that folks can be able to return their vote by mail ballot. So it's the accessibility of them and the convenience of having locations close to your home. The drawback is really, you know, any drawback of voting in person during COVID. So you are going to a polling location, it might be busy, there might be a lot of folks there, it might be crowded. It's a reason why having really accessible vote by mail is important during COVID. So that definitely is a consideration. It is helped by, what I'm hearing is that there's going to be kind of a separate space for folks that bring their vote by mail ballots directly to their polling locations, so that they won't have to stand in such a longer line for the folks that are filling out provisional ballots, which takes longer. So if you're bringing your vote by mail that's already completed and you're handing it to a poll worker, it's going to be kind of a quicker process they set up for people to ensure that they can get in and out quicker without as much exposure.
Great, thank you. And finally, Brett, what are the pros and cons of in-person voting either before Election Day for early voting or on Election Day?
So yeah, so for in-person voting, we're talking basically about election day coming to the polls. Polls are open from 6 to 8 p.m. And try not to repeat too much of the things that Jesse said, because there's some overlap with those that bring their vote by mail ballot to the polls. One thing I did want to clear up is, the fact that people that go to the polls are going to be voting a provisional ballot. What does that mean? And I want to kind of give like a myth and a truth about provisional ballots, because there's a lot of confusion out there. So a provisional ballot is not automatically counted the same way, people are used to a machine. When you vote on the machine, it's automatically counted. Instead, what it means when it's a provisional ballot is that you have to wait to make sure that everything kind of clears up and any issues that might be outstanding clears up before your ballot gets counted. So the myth that's out there is that, the provisional ballots don't really ever get counted unless it's a close race. That's not accurate. The truth is that the provisional ballots do get counted, but they may get counted last because you have to wait to see if all these issues check out. And particularly in other elections, but especially in this election, the major issue is they want to wait until all the vote by mail ballots have a chance to come in so that they can check to see if somebody that filled out a provisional ballot voted by mail. Obviously, if they already voted by mail, they can't vote twice, so the provisional ballot's not going to be accepted. So the truth is that it may just end up getting counted last, but it still does get counted. In terms of pros, I think a lot of people just feel good about going to a polling location. There are certain people out there that just feel like it's a greater sense of, fulfilling their civic duties. Voters feel like their ballot has been submitted and can't get lost in the mail. It's kind of a good option for procrastinators, those who have had issues with their ballots and haven't gotten a new ballot from the county clerk, and those who are disabled that can't vote a paper ballot. In terms of timing, you don't have to worry about when it's going to be received because you're right there doing it in person on election day. And there's kind of a little bit less room for error on a provisional ballot than there is with a vote by mail ballot, where there's kind of multiple envelopes and certifications and things like that that people can get tripped up. The cons, I think the obvious one is COVID, which we already spoke about. The fact that there's consolidated polling locations, I know Jesse mentioned this, but the polling location may be different from where your polling location was in previous years. So that can cause some voter confusion. Now, there's supposed to be, I believe, and if someone knows otherwise, let me know, but I believe that they're supposed to be mailing out a postcard about a week before the election to let people know where their voting location is. My recommendation to everybody is to kind of do that homework even in advance of that. There could be long lines because there's less polling places and it could be a further distance to travel. Another con is just the typical things you see at polling locations in every election. Are they going to run out of provisional ballots at certain places? Is there going to be an issue with the poll book? Is there going to be an issue about having enough poll workers showing up, when polls open and things of that nature?
Thank you. And I do just want to clear up because I may have caused some confusion. So just confirm that what I'm saying now is accurate. In New Jersey, there is early voting via vote by mail ballots, but there is no in-person early voting. If you want to vote in person, you have to go on election day. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Great, thank you. So we are almost out of time, but for each of our panelists, in just a couple of sentences, if folks come away from what we've discussed today with just like one or two takeaways, what would you want that to be?
Yes, I'll be brief. I would say first, make a plan ahead of election day. As we discussed, the many different ways to vote. Find out what is your way you're going to go about voting. And also, if you're going to decide to vote by mail, vote as early as possible. Is when you receive that mail-in ballot, go ahead and take care of it and decide how you're going to deliver it. So if there are any issues that come up, there'll be time to rectify it. And also, lastly, if you have any issues or any questions about the election, please visit njisj.org/vote. njisj.org/vote. We have a lot of materials and a lot of frequently asked questions on our website. Thank you.
So I guess because the Temple is co-sponsoring this, I feel the need to leave everyone with a little bit of what I'll call Jewish guilt, which those who have a Jewish grandmother may be familiar. You know, if you go and visit your grandmother and you leave, she's going to say, thanks for coming. Maybe you won't wait so long next time until you see me again. So it's going to be a little similar to that. And what I'm going to say is that democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not something that you just watch. You need to participate in it. It's extremely important that everyone watching this not only goes and votes, but encourages their friends and family to go and vote too. But, and here's the Jewish guilt part, voting is so important, but it's also just the bare minimum. Voting by itself doesn't make a democracy. We have countries that have fascist dictatorships that have voting or that only allow you to vote for one candidate. So what I would encourage people, especially maybe some that don't like the choices that we have in certain races this cycle around, what are we doing to make sure that the candidates that we want are representing us and that they appear on the ballot? What are we doing to protect the right for other people to vote in addition to just ourselves? So in closing, don't be passive about democracy. Exercise your right to vote, protect the rights of others, and fight for your ability to influence the world around you. And what I would submit is that when you have a fully functioning democracy, that is when your vote will matter the most.
So Aaron and Brad, I think, said great points. I would just add, if you come across information that gives you kind of an emotional reaction, take a beat, take a breath, and know that there are things out there right now that are meant to cause fear and anger and divide us, and it's not necessarily true. So know where to go for accurate information. Go right to sources and share accurate information. Don't feed into things that are meant to kind of really keep you home and keep you afraid.
That's awesome. Thank you all of you for actually keeping that brief and concise and getting really helpful information out there for folks. I would add just two things: reminders to everyone that election day is the deadline for voting, but not the day that we're actually going to have results, particularly with so many states having mail-in voting and with COVID happening. It's going to take time to count votes. So just for folks to temper their expectations. And also, given that there has been some confusing reporting, to clarify for everyone watching, the census deadline is October 31st. You still have time to fill out your census, and filling out your census affects who you can vote for. These things are connected, they are related, they are important. If you have not filled out your census, please fill it out. If you have, check with your family, your friends, everyone you know, remind them to fill out their census. This is a nonpartisan issue, it is an important issue, please do it. We are unfortunately out of time and we have to wrap up. Thank you again to our amazing panelists for sharing your time and your knowledge with us. We'll be sending a follow-up email with all of the links that we discussed today, as well as links to information about how you can get involved. We'll be posting a recording of this webinar if you want to share it, if you want to watch it again, if you forgot what your options for voting are and you want to double check. And also remember to make sure that you're registered to vote. You still have time to double check or to register if you're not, and make a voting plan. I love that Jessie shared hers. That's fantastic. And share your voting plan with the people in your life, because studies have shown that if you share your voting plan, others are more likely to make their voting plan. So thank you all for joining us, and we have to wrap up. Take care.